Welcome to the Cambridge Financial Podcast with Bert Salazar, CEO at Cambridge Financial Partners, LLC. This podcast is all about tax-preferred retirement planning, economics, financial risk management, and achieving a risk-free and successful financial life. Now, your host, Bert Salazar. Bert Salazar. Bert Salazar.
Hey, good day, everyone. Welcome to another Cambridge podcast. As always, I'm excited to be here with all of you. Number one, I hope all of you had a wonderful Easter weekend. I surely did here in South Florida, so I'm excited for a new week. We're almost approaching the month of June, and whenever you turn around, half of the year it's already over. So any type of planning that you've done in the past or any resolutions that you had for 2019, hopefully you're well on your way there. Just as we are here at Cambridge and the Gables Tax Planning Group and the other companies that we own. Actually, today is going to be episode number 71. And last week in episode number 70, we had a little bit of fun because we talked about, from a financial standpoint, what was better, a hammer or a screwdriver. And hopefully most of you were able to get some pretty good feedback out of that podcast, because it kind of shared some light as to the importance of making the right decisions at the right times for the right reasons and having the right tools in place in order for you to be able to do that. Now today, since it is episode number 71, I want to spend a little bit of time in discussing with you the importance of risk assessments in retirement. And this is very prevalent because whenever we do an audit for a client that's coming in to us for the first time, or for existing clients we audit every single year, we find a pattern that is very, very similar for the vast majority of Americans that we encounter from a financial standpoint. They have been taking a very aggressive approach to the retirement account savings, to the retirement planning. So it's just like in a traditional football game. The offense has a tendency to bring and put people on the stance, but it is the defense that actually wins Super Bowls. So I think the conversation today is going to be geared toward, how can you win the Super Bowl of retirement? And if you're going to do that, you have to really look at your financial decisions through a telescope as opposed to a microscope, because the view is going to change completely from a business and from a mathematical perspective. Now, whenever we discuss the risk assessment and retirement, and this is something that we do every single day of the week for every client that we have in our portfolio, we want to make certain that we can address the potential issues with, the four major risks that are going to be affecting each and every one of us at some point in time in the future. And I know you've heard me talk about, these in the past, but it is very, very important. And it is incumbent upon all of us and all of you to make certain that we do our due diligence when it comes to these issues. The risk of dying too soon, the risk of living too long, the risk of living with a disability, and then last but not least is the risk of living with eroding factors like taxes, inflation, stock market volatility, interest rate volatility, propensity to consume, fees and maintenance charges, and obviously lawsuits, because we do live in a litigious society, so you want to make sure that your assets are protected at a very, very important and critical time in your lives. So let's start by talking a little bit about managing the risk of dying too soon. And this is a risk that is very critical for the vast majority of the clients that we engage, because, whenever we do any type of auditing, we find out that most of the clients and that come to see us for the first time are not really protecting their assets, and they're not protecting their families to the level that they should be from the risk of a premature death. When someone dies in the family, and no one ever dies at the right time, and this is something that I share with all my clients every time we have a discussion about, how to manage risk. No one ever dies at the right time. And if you say, well, Bert, what do you think the right time would be? I would argue that, if you're really old and you have no more money and most of your family members that you love and care for are no longer around, then I would argue that may be a right time to call it a day. But we have no control over that. So managing the risk of dying too soon is going to be very critical for all of us at some point in time in the future. Now, why do I think that's so important? Well, number one, when someone dies or passes on, a lot of things are going to die with that person. If that person had a pension and they made a choice in receiving that pension benefit as a life income only pension, then the pension is going to die the day that the individual does. The other thing is one of the Social Security benefits is also going to die. If you happen to be married and filing jointly and one of you were to pass away prematurely, then one of those Social Security benefits is going to go away. Yes, the surviving spouse does have the right and the ability to take up the higher Social Security benefit, but one of those Social Security benefits is going to go away whether you want to or not. And for those of you that are not protecting the risk of dying too soon enough when it comes to your Social Security benefits, please bear in mind that if you have a family and one of them were to pass away and one of those Social Security benefits are also gone, remember that when a family gets in retirement, when a family is used to living on two Social Security benefits and all of a sudden there's only one, they're going to have to offset that vacuum, and they're going to have to close that hole somewhere somehow. If they have other assets in retirement, they're going to have to expedite or accelerate the distribution of those assets in order to mitigate that additional income that is no longer coming in from a Social Security perspective. So that would, and many times, accelerates the disposition of those additional assets by an additional 5 to 8 years sooner than expected. So many times, unless you're properly protected, you may run out of money before you run out of life because of the fact that the surviving spouse has no choice but to invade more principal and interest out of an account that they were hoping that would last a longer period of time. But because of the fact that one of the spouses passed away prematurely, then the acceleration of the distribution to offset the improper planning, and again, you heard me right, the improper planning of Social Security at death will now exacerbate the distribution of those assets and is going to force those assets to disappear a lot sooner than expected. The other issue that is very critical to understand is that from a risk management perspective, protecting the risk of dying too soon also has to do with protecting your assets. If you do it the right way, then obviously the death benefit that would be paid, because most of the time the only way you're going to be able to protect, that Social Security benefit going away or, the value of that pension going away is by having some kind of a replacement vehicle. And most of the time, the most suitable replacement vehicle to own at the time when it's most important would be a life insurance policy with a death benefit that would be guaranteed. Always think that although life insurance they have many different features and benefits, the death portion of the life insurance contract serves as money in escrow, and escrow closes the day someone dies. Now, what type of insurance policy would you purchase to protect against the loss of Social Security benefits or the loss of a pension benefit, or the protection of assets in retirement, or at least to increase the distribution rate without having to risk running out of money before out of line? Well, the answer is it depends. It could be a whole life policy, it could be term insurance, it could be an IUL, which is an index universal life, and it would have to be set up depending on the needs and objectives and the replacement value for that individual family. So please remember that if you're going to do proper planning, first you have to conduct an audit. And once you conduct an audit, then you're going to determine the amounts, the type of products, and the type of program that you're going to use in order to protect your family from the risk of a premature death or dying too soon. The second risk that we always address when we manage clients for the first time and also on an annual basis is the risk of living too long. As I have said many a times, Americans are living a lot longer today than ever before. So the biggest propensity there is to, unless you do it the right way, you may very well run out of money before you run out of life. And if you're married filing jointly, or if you happen to be single and you're fairly healthy and you're age 65, there's a pretty high probability that you may have to plan for at least 3 decades in retirement. In those decades, I call them the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. So those are things that are very critical for you to plan for if you want to have a successful and a pure retirement life. Now, what are some of the things that you can do in order to protect that? Well, you need to make certain that if you're ever going to bounce a check, let it be to the undertaker, because if you bounce a check before you actually pass away, then you just ran out of money before you ran out of life. So what are some of the things that you can do? Well, create more guaranteed products. Now, if you have the luxury of having a guaranteed pension from your employer, then you're on the top 1% of the food chain when it comes to Americans and retirement. Social Security benefits is another guaranteed look-alike pension. But many Americans do not have access to guaranteed pensions through private or public employers. So they may very well have to create their own pension. One of the things that I have noticed over the past 20 years is that many of the clients that have come to see me for the first time have all of their eggs in one basket, whether it's an IRA or a 401k. But you need to start thinking more about the distribution of those assets than the accumulation of those assets, especially the closer and closer that you get to retirement. Because when you get to retirement and you start taking distribution out of those assets, the rules of engagement totally change. You're going from an accumulation rate, which is what you have been doing over the last 30, 35, 40, 45 years, to a distribution rate. And again, those rules change drastically, because it's no longer the internal rate of return that you receive on the accumulation of your assets, but is how do you maximize the distribution rate so that you can get more with less. Now, there are various techniques that can be used in order to make certain that you do it the right way. But what I have seen in the many audits that I have done is that most times that income coming out is not guaranteed. And because of the fact that the income is not guaranteed and is invested in the market, the families that have these 401ks and IRAs can only invade the interest that those accounts generate. They cannot invade principal because they have not earned the right to invade principal. And the reason why they cannot invade principal is because if you're married and you're filing jointly and you love your spouse, you want to make certain that you only take enough income out of that account or enough interest out of that account that in the event that you were to pass away at some point in time in the future, that there is enough principal in that account in order to maintain the standard of living to that surviving spouse for many, many years to come into the future. The challenge with that is, well, where are you going to invest the money? Back in the 90s, you could have taken the privilege of taking your retirement assets and put them in a CD and earn a 5 to 6% return on those investments. Well, try to get that 5 to 6% in a CD today. So if you're now retiring in the 21st century, interest rates have been so reduced that you cannot use the interest-bearing accounts in order to maintain your standard of living unless you have $2 to $3 million in retirement assets that you can afford to only take a 1 to 2% distribution rate and still be able to make ends meet. So you may have no choice but either to reduce your standard of living and perhaps just barely live at the poverty line, which is not something that you intended for your retirement life and that of your spouse, or you may be forced to start invading principal at a point in time that you can least afford to do that. The third option would be to start taking higher risk. So many of you may have no choice but to start to invest more aggressively in the stock market. But obviously, that's most of the clients that we engage that are in retirement. They want less risk. They don't want more risk. But because of the fact that they have not done proper distribution planning or they have not done defensing planning, then chances are they may have no choice whatsoever. Well, what can you do? Well, taking portions of your assets to create guaranteed income for life that you and your family cannot outlive would be very, very important. You can use immediate annuities to replace or to at least to be able to provide for those fixed expenses that are coming to your household every single month. And you can buy immediate annuities that will allow you to have that income for as long as you live on a guaranteed basis, very similar to a traditional pension or a Social Security benefit. The other things that you can do is you can purchase fixed index annuities with a principal protection feature that will allow you to participate in the upside swing of the market without having to jeopardize or put your principal at risk. So you have the ability, to gain and have the best of both worlds when it comes to your assets. Now, these types of programs will offer you the opportunity to have guaranteed income for life as well. And then obviously those are things that are very, very critical for the majority of Americans that are trying to enjoy their retirement without having to look at their stock brokerage account or their CDs accounts every single day in order to mitigate any potential volatility that may come your way in the future. Now, the third risk has nothing to do with dying too soon or living too long, but it does have to do with, the risk of living with a disability. And that's very prevalent because people are living a lot longer today. So therefore, the susceptibility to having a long-term care need in the future is more relevant today than it's ever been in the past. Now, obviously, what can you do with that? Well, number one, the cost of a nursing home in the United States has been increasing at 3 times the rate of inflation. So depending on what state you live in, it is important to note that you may be paying anywhere between $6,500 to $7,500, perhaps even $8,000 a month in order to have someone being cared for in a nursing facility. So where's that money going to come from? You're going to have to invade the principal a lot sooner than you expected. What if that person that happens to be in a nursing facility spends 3, 4, 5 years, 10 years in a nursing facility? What is that going to do to the available assets for the surviving spouse? that may be very, very healthy and may be living another 20 years after the passing of that person or that spouse that happens to be in a nursing facility. So unless you do proper planning, and this is where the defense comes into play, you may very well be disinheriting your family without wanting to. I have always heard of the saying that, the road to hell is paved with a lot of good intentions, and many a times, we all have good intentions, and the challenge for most of us is that very few times have any of you had the ability to look at your retirement planning from a risk management perspective, because if you had done so, you would have made decisions that are totally different than what you have done up until today. So it would be incumbent upon all of you to go back to your financial advisors. Now, if you enjoy the topics that I have shared with you and you want to reach out to me, you feel free to do so. You can call me at 786-766-1042, or you can reach out to me at Bert, B-E-R-T, at GablesTaxGroup.com, which is the firm that we use to do the audits, and we will do an audit of your retirement assets for your benefit and that of your family. So there are a number of things that you need to do in order to protect yourself and your family from the risk of living with a disability. The last risk that I want to share with you today is how to protect against the risk of living with eroding factors, taxes, inflation, stock market volatility, interest rate volatility, and the like. And obviously you have heard me talk about taxation for a number of years now because of all the podcasts and the webcast and the webinars and the seminars that we do. But at the end of the day, you need to make certain that you can protect your family when it comes to taxation, because we have more debt in our country than we've ever had in the past, yet our tax liabilities are at the third lowest that they've ever been. So the only way that the government is going to be able to offset the increase in debt in America today is going to be by increasing taxes. Now, under the new tax law, we're actually living a wonderful world, and I encourage each and every one of you to take advantage of that because the new rules of engagement are going to change December 31st of 2025. So when all of us wake up on January 1 of 2026, the taxation world is going to look totally different than it does today. Number one, taxes are going to be higher. Number two, the standard deduction is going to be lower than they are today. For many Americans, when you get to retirement, a lot of those deductions that you enjoyed during your retirement years, you're no longer going to have around. So that may force your tax bracket to a higher level without you barely doing anything about that. And that's going to have a negative impact on your assets, because at the end of the day, it's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep. So the more the government takes from you, the higher your distribution rate will have to be in order to offset that increase in tax liability. Where taxes are going to be in the next 10 years? Well, if you listen to the experts, they may very well have to double, otherwise our country is going to go bankrupt. And I am one that feels very strongly about that. How about inflation? Inflation is a silent killer. It's like the heart attack of your financial world. Number one, inflation is not tax deductible. So if you have an inflation rate at 3%, depending on your tax bracket, you may have to earn 4.5% in order to be able to offset a 3% inflation rate. The other thing that is very critical is you need to understand how inflation works. Most of the government statistics, when they promote the inflation in the United States, they leave out the inflationary cost of food, energy, and healthcare. So if you leave out food, energy, and healthcare, then obviously inflation rate is going to be lower. But when you factor in food, energy, and healthcare, your inflation rate may almost double compared to what the government is putting out. And because it is so volatile, the U.S. government leaves it out for us to figure out ourselves. Just go try to put gas at the gas pump during the summertime. And then obviously look at the food choices that you make and the energy choices that you make for yourself and your family, and then obviously healthcare. So those are things that you're going to have to pay attention to. Now, how do you repair all of those things? Well, you have to do proper planning. How about stock market volatility? It's remember, at the end of the day, when you're in retirement, you don't want to have to deal with volatility. At least you want to be able to protect your principal, and that's something that Warren Buffett said many, many years ago. And he said that there were only two rules of investments, and only two rules. Rule number one, never risk the principal of your money when it comes to investing. Rule number two, do not forget rule number one. And he was very facetious about that, because at the end of the day, is not the return on your money, but the return of your money. So understanding how stock market volatility, when it happens, and the fact that stock market volatility during your retirement years have a tremendous negative effect than during your working years. Why is that? Well, in retirement, you have no choice but to take money out of your accounts, whether they're going up or they're going down, because you have to maintain your standard of living. While you were working, it was a totally different ball game, because you didn't need the retirement assets. You were still employed. You were still generating an income for yourself and your family. You were still making contributions to your IRAs and your 401ks. Your employer was still giving you a match. So it was a lot easier to mitigate the risk of stock market volatility, because you really didn't need the money, and then you had time on your side, so you had the ability to just wait it out. Well, when it comes to retirement, you don't have the ability to wait it out anymore. So you need to be totally diversified, and you need to be in investments whereby your principal is guaranteed, that you still have the ability to benefit from the upside of the market, that you have a portion of your assets creating guaranteed income for the rest of your life, so you can be more careful in your distribution, and then that way you can benefit from all of the great things that you and your family could accomplish during your sunset and your retirement years. The other thing, interest rate volatility. Again, going back to my example of the CD back in the 90s, where you were able to get 5 to 6%. Today, you can barely get 2% on a CD at any bank in the United States. Propensity to consume. Some of us are savers. Some of us are spenders. You have to be careful how you manage your money in retirement, because you don't have a second chance to do it, because you only live once. Frank Sinatra used to say that, you only live once, but if you lived like him, once was enough. Well, obviously not all of us are Frank Sinatra, but, he had all of the money in the world at that point in time. But again, you have to be able to enjoy life, and you got to be able to enjoy your life, especially during the go-go years, which are normally between the ages of 65 and 75, where you're still fairly healthy. So again, when you really start to look at your retirement platform and look at all the decisions that you have made throughout your retirement life, it's important to look at them through a telescope as opposed to a microscope, because the view is going to be totally different. The telescopic view is going to give you the opportunity to truly identify which areas you need to improve upon. What are some of the features and benefits that need to be included in a proper retirement distribution program in order for you to offset any of the potential risks of, dying too soon, living too long, living with a disability, and or living with eroding factors that all of us are going to have to face in the very near future. So I cannot emphasize enough on all of you to start doing some due diligence, and the more time that you have on your side of the ledger before you retire, the better off it's going to be. Why? Because you're going to have the ability to make adequate changes and to make those changes without having to rush through them in a way that is going to enhance your retirement distribution planning. Now, as always, feel free to reach out to me. Again, Bert Salazar at 786-766-1042. You can also reach me at Bert, B-E-R-T, at GablesTaxGroup.com, or you can also send me an email at Bert, B-E-R-T, at BertSalazar.com, and I'll be more than happy to address any questions. We can even schedule a 30-minute video conference so we can see each other, and there would not be any cost or obligation on your part. Because at the end of the day, my goal, as I always say at the end of every podcast with all of you, is to kind of help you and your family change the way that you see things. Because when you change the way that you see things, the things that you see change. So again, thanks very much for giving me a few minutes of your time today, and I'll talk to you again next week. Take care. Bye-bye.